Welcome to the Jaron Jarvis channel. I am Jaron Jarvis. Today, I would like to introduce to you, For Everyone, from Melissa. For Everyone. We had found the book at a yard sale fundraiser for the local library. When I asked Marlene Staple, the librarian, how much, she just shrugged and said we could take it without even glancing at the title. I had been willing to spend at least $5 on it, as a sterling member of the $10 Club, and money had been only a minor issue. When Melissa and I had gotten to the sale, they were closing up shop, but we weren't looking for anything in particular. Maybe some knickknacks, bric-a-brac, give a dog a bone kitsch that we could bring to our new place. We both also had different ideas what constituted an item worthy of consideration for the apartment. I was fond of tchotchkes and other assorted items that served no other real purpose besides being an extension of my personality. Melissa liked tables, chairs, small desks. Items that had intrinsic value. The sale, it stood to reason, would satisfy both our needs. Plus, it was for a good cause. The basement of the library had caught fire a few months back and the community lacked the funds to put together the recovery effort. Realistically, the money raised by the sale wouldn't do much, but it let us all believe we were contributing to one of the old institutions of Westing. Car trouble had stalled us on the way there, and when we finally did arrive, they had loaded most everything of utility back up for storage. Still, Melissa, like a bloodhound, made her way to an old accordion table, and without much thought slid the top back. Sitting in the center was the book, the leather cover worn and yellow, with creases down the spine, discolored with age. The front and back covers were both blank, but she picked it up and said, "This one. We don't have space in the car for a desk like that." "Not the desk," she said, idly thumbing through the pages. "The book." She stared over the desk, pushing her hair behind her ear and tucking the strands behind the arm of her glasses. It fell out a few seconds later, it never stayed back. She let out a sharp burst of air to push it away from her face. "Desk is too ugly anyway. Marlene told us to take it, and we did. The weather report had a wind advisory in effect today, but the last time I went outside it was still as death. Couldn't even hear the crickets or the birds. Just silence and more silence. The problem with my belief system is that I don't really have one. At a young age I had dabbled in assorted religions, seeking some sort of ultimate answer, before drawing my own conclusion that it wasn't for me. The gods of old and the gods of new alike seemed almost petty, insecure, abusive. It was a dark, conditional love, for all the love they gave, but that was to be the case when old scripture was translated by petty, insecure, abusive lovers of language, men and women alike. We can't help but imprint on what we create, and we can't help but change ourselves in the creation. We siphon off who we are to bring new things to life, and I guess that's not always good. I swear, this has a point. I'm not just railing to rail. The book sat on the coffee table, IKEA, Natch, function over form all day, every day, for a week, and we didn't really give it much thought, we were so busy unpacking. I spent the better part of an afternoon arranging my bobbleheads on top of the bookcase so Boots, the world's clumsiest cat, wouldn't be driven to knock them down by her mere presence being near them. Melissa and I, best configure, think that Boots must have it really in for the paper industry. You leave a spiral notebook out, and she'd shred the pages. You leave a pen and a pad by the counter to write down your grocery list, she'll save you the trouble if you had confetti written on it. So on the shelf directly below my bobbly boys, I put my hardbacks and paperbacks, my first editions and my sentimental treasures. Below that, Dan Brown books, and on the shelf closest to the floor, the Twilight series. Boots may not have been a voracious reader, but she could work her way through those novels like so many cul-de-sac moms before her. She never touched the untitled book. Gave it a wide berth. We switched kitty litters shortly after the move in an effort to distink the living room, but the trade-off was she tracked little flecks of fine sand wherever she went. There were tracks leading up to the book, where I assume she gave it a healthy sniff, and then she moved away from it, the tracks growing longer, less precise, as if she wasn't stepping back, but pushing herself without taking her paws off the table. A 10-inch perimeter of cat tracks surrounded the book. She wouldn't get any closer than that. Cats are weird. I didn't think too much of it. And now, as soon as I stop writing, it's all over. So sit down for a few minutes. Take a load off. This story will take a fraction of a second to tell, but it was a millennia in the making. Melissa had left for work for the day, leaving me to sit and stare at my laptop screen. The blinker taunted me. Blink. Hey. Blink. What's up? Blink. This is tough, ain't it? Blink. Slugger. Maybe. Blink. Your mom was right. Blink. Your degree could. Blink. Make for good. Blink. Kindling. I clicked on the X in the upper right-hand corner of the screen in an effort that I thought might have conveyed my hatred, but it's a click. Hard to put much emotion into it without breaking my mouse. I poured myself a small drink and then another before moving to the bookcase to see if I could find any inspiration. Like the brilliant words I was so sure lay hidden inside myself, I could find nothing to invite any sort of free thought or association or drive. Just words upon words that were the same words that I used, but somehow better. Maybe in the arranging. Maybe in the use of italics. Whatever it was, I was close. Just as close as I had been for the last day, the last week, and the last forever. I sat down on the sofa, turned on my TV, tried to connect to Netflix before remembering we hadn't set up the internet, and scowled, before turning my attention to the book on the table. I hadn't given it much of a second thought, but now. Maybe the words in there would be a little worse, the order would be a little off, maybe, it could inspire me to be better. The book was warm to the touch, and I had thought for half a second maybe Boots had rested on it, but she was asleep in a sunbeam atop her kitty condo. It's the little things you don't think much of. As I flipped the book open, my stomach dropped into my bowels, my legs became lead, I started sweating profusely because the apartment was no longer just Boots and I, there was something else, something formless, everywhere around me. Telling me to put the book down, whispering while saying nothing, putting the image in my head of closing the book and dropping it, over and over and over, each time the book closing causing a twang of pain in my head repeatedly growing in intensity until it reached a crescendo and I could not put the book down. If I didn't, I could not be certain that my head would not split in two as if struck by a dull axe blade from the inside. The divine had certainly spoken to me that morning. I listened, and put the book down. Boots is still alive, as best I can tell. But in college I loved going to jazz shows, drinking gin at hipster speakeasies, and wearing shades. So maybe curiosity had it in for me, instead. As the sun began to set, I opened the book again, and I felt the eye of the divine turn itself to me once more, and I could feel the impulse start at the base of my neck to stop, to leave well enough alone, but I read the first passage I could and that's when everything stopped. Everything stopped. Except me. I turned and looked at Boots, who was still sitting acting as landlord and sentry over the kitchen counter. Moments before, she had been cleaning herself. Now, she did not move, her front paw hanging in front of her mouth, inches from her tongue, her back legs splayed out in front, partway through her wash cycle. I stood, and moved towards her taking 1 step, 2 steps, and I noticed that my footfalls generated nothing. Not a feeling of solid ground against my heel, not the sound of my skin hitting the floorboards. As I moved, I felt no air cross my face, the faint scent of kitty litter now absent, the low hum of the air conditioner unit now completely silenced. I mouthed, hello, trying to speak, but nothing came out. I reached out and touched Boots, expecting her to jump back, or cry, or start in fear, but she was still as death and hard as a stone. I touched the faucet in the sink, the bubble of water hanging from the end so ready to drip down into the basin, but it didn't move. It didn't feel wet or cold. It just felt. The only change, the only physical sensation that crossed my body, was warmth, emanating from the book that I had dropped onto the coffee table. I could not feel my heart beat and I could not draw a single breath, although I was beginning to exhibit the non-physical signs of a panic attack. My mind raced. I knew if I could, I would feel my chest tightening, I would feel my heart pounding, the veins in my temples pulsing, the pure bile rising in my throat, but it never happened. I could not. It all stayed locked into my brain. I made my way back over to the book, and traced the cover with my hand. I could feel the bumps on the cover, my finger bounced along the creases in the spine, and I picked it up. The one thing I could move, now in my left hand. And as I held it, I reached down and touched the table, and the coolness of the wood reached up to meet my skin. I set the book back down, and touched the table, still as granite, with no real sensation. I touched the table and gripped the book, and the table came alive again, as alive as a table could be, and you can never know the comfort of realizing how alive even the most still of things are, allowing me to engage in the most minor of manners, to appreciate how it existed. I never knew true relief until I was able to acknowledge that the table was Boots. Boots still did not stir, still did not move, still did not radiate heat or life. Boots was still a statue, frozen. I examined everything in my apartment over the next hour, seeing what I could touch while holding the book, seeing what would leach its life, its essence back into my existence, seeing what would remain dormant, frozen in place. I looked back over to the sofa, and saw the indent where I had been seated. The cushion had not pushed back out the trace of where I had been. An hour, it took me to examine the apartment, and the sun still had not set. The sun had not moved. The clocks had not changed. The cursor on my computer had not blinked. I had the opposite problem of Billy Pilgrim. I had become stuck in time. With the book in one hand, I was able to leave the apartment, prying the door open and closing it behind. Somewhere, in the back of my mind, I knew somehow that even if I had not shut it, it would close itself, it would reset to the ready, that my movement, that of a phantom, had no true effect. As I walked down the stairs into the lobby of my complex, away from where I had picked up the book, I felt a small sense of calm come over me. That I had somehow managed to evade the eye. That I had frozen the divine. I walked from my building down the block, and sat under a tree, knowing how much I had angered it, knowing how far the divine was ready to go before I had set the book down the first time after opening it. In the recesses of my mind, I held a glimmer of hope, that if I was able to fill my mind with thoughts of forgiveness, of contriteness, that they might spare me if I read the passage again. And so I did. And as I heard the birds chirp, as I felt the grass beneath me sink, as I felt my body lower just a few crucial centimeters to the ground, I became as fire. Tears streamed down my face, almost unable to see, my limbs strained and my muscles ached, and I knew this was not one of forgiveness. That for the fraction of a second I had managed to elude their gaze, that I was not forgiven, that I would not be forgiven, that some transgressions are so beyond clemency that I began to think that I deserved death. It cried out in a voice, in a cacophony of sound, of every creature that had mercy in their hearts that was smote by pure hatred, wailing in torture and agony, weary for rest that would never come and fostering invisible scars that would never heal, the furnace destroying all shred of decency, of what was right, clamoring for one more bitter act to try and sate an unyielding hunger. It is done. It is done. It is. They stopped. Though my eyes had begun to soften, had begun to melt in their sockets, I was able to read the passage again. The divine, frozen, my body no longer in torment. I looked down at my hands and saw they were covered in burned rivulets that moments before had been seeping, steaming what was in me, bursting out and down to the bone, but I had stopped it. My life was now without pain, the pain held at bay by the same force that held the divine back. The split second of agony now over, and although my body was in the starting stages of self-shredding, my core splitting, and bones breaking, I no longer felt it. I did, however, feel foolish. Foolish that I had held on to any sort of hope that this might be a forgiving divine. The same divine that allowed a mine collapse outside of the town I grew up, trapping miners 1,000 feet below the ground 200 years ago, that collected their screams and their dying thoughts. The same divine that allowed rescuers to go in, and caused a second collapse, dropping those brave enough to rescue their fellows down a shaft where their bodies broke at first against the ground and then against each other. The same divine that not only allowed my father and mother to die in a burning wreck, but inhaled as they were cooked and savored the scent, this divine was not forgiving. At a time it had, perhaps, housed mercy, but mercy doesn't keep the lights on. This divine may not be the one true above all, but they were a petty and cowardly lot, preying on fear and weakness and desolation. Anyway, here's Wonderwall. Since the sun no longer set and water should be as ground to me, I spent untold time walking to the Atlantic, clambering over waves, until I could see the night sky, and I picked a star. Not the brightest, not the biggest, a star in wane, a star in death, a star in collapse, and named it as the pen and the page, the author of all misery. Nice to finally see your face, Chuck. It's ugly, but it's what you were born with. Mentally, I marked this place, 2 miles east of the quarry, a small fishing boat, and moved on. Over the next untold years, I did what I wanted, book in hand, to try and eke out a decent life. I stood on the waters in aquariums and stared at the creatures below. I traveled to monuments and landmarks, standing atop and astride, taking in all that I could see, all that I could care to see. I finally went to Europe, Melissa. And I'm sorry I went without you. Must have been at least 30 years ago at this point, but my body has not aged. For Melissa. Melissa. The countless times I visited you at work, the countless hours I spent sitting at your desk. Of all the fortunes I've been granted, meeting you was the greatest. And freezing time while you smiled, that's up there. I've seen so many things. I've seen lions so close I could count their teeth, and I've seen bears both docile and in the midst of shredding a hiker. I've visited the poles, sitting legs crossed, looking at the pebbles the mated penguins have given, and if that's not love, it's at least something. I've jumped from waterfalls, I've dived down cliffs. Climbed Everest, like, 4 fucking times, and let me tell you, I don't know what all the fuss is about. When you can't die and you can't be hurt and you don't have to worry about oxygen or supplies, it's shockingly easy. Of everything, you are who I come back to the most. Phone pressed against your ear, folding a paper airplane, hair tucked behind the arm of your glasses. You had to have done that a second ago, it never stays. And for a while, I didn't know what to do because I couldn't let it end. I had to find a way out, a way to change everything. Nothing in the book helped, and I can't open any others. I've found a grand total of 1 functioning pen that I can use and a notepad. I'll put this on the shelf, behind my chokies, my bobbly boys, and maybe one day you'll find it when you're boxing my things up. There won't be anything left of me, I don't think. But I've had years upon years to think about this, and there's only one way I can see it going. Melissa, I know you love tables and chairs, I know you love function over form, but that's never who I was. I was barely a function and I hardly had form, and you still managed to love me. And I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry it's like this, and I wish there was another way. But nothing can move on until I've moved on. I hope you keep some of the knick-knack, bric-a-bracs, give a dog a bone shit I bought over the years, the little extensions of me and who I am, and I hope that you don't hate me for leaving. I didn't want to. I never wanted to. I know when I read from the book, my voice will join the chorus of others, the symphony of the damned and the condemned. And I will try to bring them the love in death they never had. When I finish this, when I put down the pen and hide my note, I'm going to walk to the Atlantic, and visit the quarry. I'm going to walk 2 miles east, and I'm going to look up at the sky, to the waning star, the dying star, the collapsing star, and I will read from the book one more time, and whatever the divine had started in me under the tree will finish, and the book will sync with what's left of my body. I've been walking this fucking earth for 1,000 years and I have nothing but love now, and that's what I will bring to it. And I hope it's enough. Gideon.